Are you a devout Christian because you love God, or do you just fear the devil? Stay tuned and we'll explore where the root of your belief system may really come from. So, this is not only a question for fundamentalist Christians, but all Christians in general, and it's an uncomfortable one. And that inquiry is, do you really love your God, or are you just afraid of hell? The concept of punishment in the afterlife for deeds done on earth wasn't something that was really thought about until about 500 years BC. From the ancient Sumerians all the way to about 500 BC to what they called the Old Archaic Greek, mostly the afterlife was considered dim for everyone. Hades, named after the Greek god Hades, who was placed in charge of the post-mortem eternal, regulated this dim, dark labyrinth of an underworld for all souls that entered. It was really only in the classical era of the Greek existence, which continued almost up to the time of Christ, where philosophers really began to think of moral implications for your conduct on earth and where that conduct would place you once you left it. Even back in the times of Socrates, via the dialogues of Plato, he speaks of the soul being immortal, in which different fields exist once you engage in the celestial transfer, one being of torture, and the Elysian fields being described as those of the blessed. But around that time period of 500 BC, when man started to contemplate whether he actually had a rudder on earth which would guide him to a better place in the afterlife, other religions began to spring up. There was the rise of Hinduism, which didn't have a hell per se, but believed if you were a rotten person on earth, you would descend into a lower social class, the lowest being the untouchables, where if you landed there, you'd probably would have a hell on earth. But if you continued to progress your life, eventually you would escape the life and death cycle and enter the moksha, or the state of bliss with the Supreme Being. And of course, Buddhism branched off and largely propagated the reincarnation factor, and propagated that your incarnate lives would be determined by the conduct of your previous lives until you as well entered that perfect state of nirvana. And then the monotheistic God of Abraham added heaven and hell, which branched out to become the Muslim, the Jew, and the Christian, all holding the commonality that you would indeed row your boat in the lake of fire if you screwed up here on earth. Now, it's important to note here that all these religions instruct the second you are cognizant of what God is, that He will punish you if you live a life of evil. In my early Catholic upbringing, we were very well aware that hell existed by third grade, and that it was waiting for us if we didn't follow the nuns' instructions on how to live our lives. Primarily, as it states in our own Bible as well as the Quran for the Muslims, that if you disconnect from your belief from God, you will suffer that painful punishment forevermore. And then the Christians added the supplemental belief in Jesus and His resurrection as well. And if you question that resurrection, then you are doomed. And let's step back for a second and talk about the great unfairness your God has implemented on the children He claims to love so much. Basically, Christian doctrine consists of this: all the souls outside of the modern era who never heard of Christ, they're going to hell. All the souls who happen to be brought up and programmed with a different religion, like that Hindu, are going to hell. And we're instructed to believe this based on a Bible in which we can prove many chapters in the Old Testament were completely fabricated, and we have no original authorship to the Gospels of the New Testament. We have no original text to study, and not only have nothing to indicate that this is actually God's Word, but many times have contradictory proof that it isn't. And on top of that, we're given a rational mind by that same God with the ability to think, and that rational mind does tell us that we have a long history of mankind manipulating religion for his own gain, and yet with all this ridiculously shoddy evidence, in which you would think an all-powerful God could have done a better job, we're simply just expected to believe it. And if we don't, your God sends us into that harbor so we can push off into that lake of fire. Not to mention the fact we have seen no evidence of this God intervening with mankind, except for those long-time fables, which many we can easily disprove, but again we're required to just simply believe. So in short, it seems that God has given us a rational mind and then expects us to accept the irrational. That does not sound like a very just God to me. That God is cruel and sadistic, because God's not on your side at all if He needs to use fear to make you accept Him. Which brings me back to my original point. Do you love your God or do you fear your God? Now, every Christian will insist they love their God. They pray to their God every day, and they really feel that God answers. But you have to ask yourself this, and this is a hard and uncomfortable question, and most Christians will not answer it honestly, especially fundamentalists. But you have to ask yourself, let's take a purely hypothetical situation. Let's say that tomorrow you wake up and find out that you're immortal, and you consequently find that the sun is never going to extinguish, destroying all life on Earth. You are going to live forever. I know it's ridiculous, but humor me. If you get hit by a train, it'll be like the movie Groundhog Day. You'll bounce right back upon awakening the next morning. There is no end to you. First of all, ask yourself if you would believe that God even exists, because I bet the atheist enrollment numbers would skyrocket. But even if you did believe that he still existed, you now know you're never going to meet him, and that he has absolutely no control over your afterlife even if you did, because there isn't one. I bet you wouldn't be wasting an hour of your time in Mass anymore on Sundays. I bet you wouldn't be worried about moving in with your girlfriend before marriage. As a matter of fact, I bet your whole moral code would change. Now, I'm not saying you'd become a bad or evil person, because there exist many atheists who aren't, but you wouldn't have this forced repression on you anymore. And I'd be willing to bet that most of you would rarely, if ever, mention God again. I equate the Christian God being much like that school bully that you're trying to be friends with. Not because you like him, but because you fear him. You figure if you're his friend, at least he won't pick on you. Or he'll bully you a lot less than someone else who is his enemy. But your real friend would be someone that you actually like. I imagine there will be comments of people telling me that they have a loving relationship with God. What I'm telling you is that relationship was based on an early childhood fear of that schoolyard bully that your parents told you roamed the playground, reiterated by your church and possibly your school for years. And that programming is powerful. Even today, as someone who has completely renounced Catholicism, I still occasionally lie awake at night with that little twinge of fear in my stomach of what if I'm wrong? And then I have to remind myself that I was programmed with this fear as an early child. At school, at home, and at church, the first 18 years of my life. Thanks to the Christians, there's always going to be that hint of fear in my soul. And today, I'm searching for truth of what that God really is, even attempting to see if there's some truth in the Christian doctrine. But the first thing you have to ask yourself in this quest is your relationship with God really based on love, or was it that bully threatened to take your lunch money? And if you'd like to read a novel about that hell coming to earth, check out my book, The Second Fall, an offbeat apocalypse of what I think Christ would be like if he actually returned, and sure to offend the fundamentalist. On Amazon now, see the link in the video description as well as the banner, and I will see you next time as we once again take that sword of reason and reality and thrust it right through the heart of ignorance.